That's fine?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending the second session of Conversations about Nomadism. This webinar project, for those of you that didn't come to our last webinar, is designed to elucidate and bring out to the forefront of scholarship the many different conversations we can have about ancient nomadism in Northeast Africa, from the Red Sea coast to the Nile to the Western Desert. For a series of different speakers, this webinar will bring new and diverse perspectives to ancient nomadic peoples of Northeast Africa, while also addressing key issues and themes relating to nomadism, such as the ancient environment, archaeological profiles of nomadism, and livestock pastoralism. Our first panel, now recorded and put online on the Ifao website, discuss the topics of semi-nomadism and so-called agro-pastoralism, with two different considerations of this topic from archaeologists surveying and excavating sites in the Western Desert. Continued webinars in December will move our topics to new frontiers of the nomadic history of Northeast Africa, with our goal to develop and build a new model of nomadism in Eastern Sudan. Today's talks will cover a very different topic, the hidden voices of nomads who lived in proximity to the Nile Valley. Hence, we have titled today's webinar, Nomad-sedentary Interactions, A Deafening Silence. Both of today's talks will demonstrate the very difficult to detect evidence for the interaction between ancient Egyptians, or even Nubians, and nomads living near the Nile Valley. New analyses and perspectives and a growing corpus of evidence from rock art and Egyptian inscriptions demonstrate that the proximal desert that the ancient Egyptians ventured into was not at all empty and had its own indigenous habitation. A habitation that has remained so elusive that it has often been ignored in the discussions and history of the Nile Basin. Today we will see two different views on this problem from two different evidence bases. One using Egyptian epigraphic records of expeditions to detect hidden indigenous guides, and the other using the extensive rock art record of the pre- and early dynastic periods to elucidate new interactions between urban peoples of the river and nomads of the desert, or if this interaction is at all as simple as I just stated. With rock art and inscriptions constituting a major category of evidence from the desert itself, these presentations will develop a theme of an archaeology of interaction. Who were the ancient desert nomads? How did they respond or cooperate with Egyptians? What part does the degrading Green Sahara model have to play in this pastoral nomadism? Okay, so that's what we'll talk about today in thematic terms. On a practical level, today's seminar will consist of two talks, first by Cristina Alù and then by Dorian Vanhulle of approximately 30 to 35 minutes. Each talk will be followed by a few questions, and after both talks, we will open the talks to a wider discussion on these general themes. On another note, myself and the organisers would like to thank the Ifao not only for hosting this event, but offering a 25% discount of publications on the occasion of this seminar. Our first speaker today is Cristina Alù. Cristina trained at the University of Pisa and earned a BA in Oriental Studies in 2013 and an MA in Egyptology in 2016, defending her PhD under a co-tutel between the University of Pisa and the University of Cologne in October 2021. Her doctoral research examines diachronically social sciences between these two, my text is gone. It's diachronically social aspects of interaction phenomenon in mining frontier regions of Egypt. Currently, she is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Ifao in a very prestigious fellowship and PCMA. Her talk is entitled The Silent Voice of the Intermediaries, Textual Attestations and Rock Depictions of Guides and Guards of the Eastern Desert in Comparison. And Cristina, when you're ready to go, please go ahead.
I think it's working, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Julian, for this introduction, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me for these interesting seminars. As already told by Julian, the talk of today, it's about the textual attestations and rock depictions of what we can call guards or guides or both in the Eastern Desert, but with a specific view on a case study. So the desert east and west of the Nile Valley have been intensely frequented since the early dynastic period by different ethnic and social communities for the procurement of precious and semi-precious raw materials. The sources, albeit a patchwork integration process between the more abundant and still partial textual records and the scarce archaeological remains of large and small-scale mining settlement, suggest that the Eastern Desert was object, subject, and medium of complex landscape socialization processes by members of the Egyptian expeditions, but also by other human groups. The desert landscape should indeed be considered as the embodiment of a large economic and cultural network made of different nodes connected between each other. These nodes are not only the actual settlements or mines, but also smaller, less structured or ephemeral features, such as huts, cairns, way stations, rock shelters with their markings and graffiti. These nodes constitute not only official circuits dominated by the pharaonic state initiative, but also production and trade flow in which the local population played a significant active role. As has been demonstrated by archaeological investigation and material cultural analysis, besides the textual sources, members of the Egyptian mining expedition lived and worked not only in contact, but also together with the local communities in several sites of the Eastern Desert. For example, evidence from Wadi el-Hudi sites, in particular from Site 5 and 9, brought to light by the Wadi el-Hudi expedition since its very beginning, and which is an expedition co-directed by Kate Liska, Meredith Brand, and Brian Kremer, shows a typically Egyptian architecture for production and storage, displaying similarities with nearby Nubian settlements in terms of construction techniques. This element, together with the finding of typical Egyptian Middle Kingdom pottery, alongside with imitation ware and C-group tableware in the domestic area of Site 5, appears to be indicative of an in situ cohabitation with Nubian communities. We know something about the other independent agents in expedition from the epigraphic and textual sources, but still scarce in the archaeological evidence. Recent investigation, those from 2021 and 2023 at Site 21, also by the Wadi el-Hudi expedition, proved the active presence of desert people related to the Middle Nubian cultural horizon, maybe nomadic communities that partially conducted mining sites in the area, but excavation are still not completed. So it's still an ongoing research. And they undertake small-scale mining parallelly, and it seems also independently, separatedly from the bigger scale mining enterprises. On the major desert route through Wadi el-Hudi in the northeastern side, Site 51 has been discovered by Wadi el-Hudi expedition this year, and an article by Kate Liska and Meredith Brand on these finds is forthcoming. It is a sandstone rock shelter that appears to be a location where pastoral nomads resided for a while, from time to time, during earth grazing. The pottery discovered during the surveys largely dates to the Islamic period, but also handcrafted Middle Nubian pottery has been found on the surface. On the rock, there are around 50 inscriptions. The majority of them features pictures of animals, cultural ibexes. A first intermediate period or early Middle Kingdom inscription is also attested, witnessing the presence of Egyptian travelers. In this multicultural borderscape, social and cultural compromises between the members of the Egyptian expedition, the desert landscape, and the local population were most probably negotiated and maintained by auxiliaries like guides and guards, also embedded within the pharaonic administration. Of these auxiliaries, we have several attestations in epigraphic and textual sources, both from the Nile Valley and from the deserts, but a close look to the rock art from the case study of Wadi el-Hudi sites might provide us with some more data. A large part of the evidence on Nu guards, for example, comes from the rock inscription left in the eastern desert mining sites, such as Wadi Amamat and Wadi el-Hudi, but also from the western desert. They are traditionally translated as hunters and frequently linked to food production institution within the Egyptian administration. The expedition account, for example, left by the steward Hanu in the Wadi Amamat, informs us about the actual function and origin of Nu. A passage read, "The Nu, native of the desert, were employed as my bodyguards." As native of the deserts, the Nu had to be the most suitable figures to monitor the movements and activities of the expedition, and in many cases, the Imi Nu, so the overseer, also carries association with military titles. This shade of meaning is the one that somehow was dominant over time, and especially during the New Kingdom. A similar role of this desert ranger should have been carried out also by the Meniu Chesemu, attested only during the Middle Kingdom, between the end of the 11th and the end of the 13th dynasty. Most papyri from or rock inscription or other documents connected to the fortresses south of the first cataract. We also know from Papyrus Reisner II that they were part of the crew of a ship that sailed from the royal residence to Tis to transmit and evidently to oversee the execution of these orders. Unlike the Nu, these Meniu Chesemu are nowhere said in the, of course, in the textual records to be desert natives. The terms Nu and Meniu Chesemu often is accompanied by the determinative of the dog or man with the dog. The dog is depicted as recurrent companion in the figures of soldiers from the late Old Kingdom to the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. It is also very common to find graffiti depicting men with dogs or just dogs along the desert routes in stationing points in both the eastern and the western deserts. At Abu Balas, for example, southwest of Dakhla Oasis, a graffiti of a man armed with a bow was found, accompanied by two dogs. Very similar is a depiction found along the route from Thebes to the western desert and dated to the early 11th dynasty. The graffiti depicts a guard accompanied by a dog and associated with a hieratic inscription that reads Imi Yau. The Imi Yau were pivotal figures who may have acted as intermediaries between the Egyptians and the local people of the deserts. They occur very often in expedition inscriptions from the Eastern Desert and South Sinai since the late 5th dynasty and throughout the Middle Kingdom. This association is significant as it would support the hypothesis of a common group identity and shared tasks of many of the guards and the guides in the Eastern and Western Desert. A list of members of the expedition to Wadi el-Hudi, dated to the 15th year of the reign of Senusert I, also mentions several groups of guards and intermediaries from various towns in the south. This is an overview of what we know from the epigraphic sources till now, but now let us look at the visual ones, the rock-carved images of this subject from various sites in Wadi el-Hudi. At site 5, 6, 13, and 27, the Wadi al-Hudi expedition have found inscriptions showing men holding staff, maces, bows, and sometimes smiting enemies. Some of them wears feathers on their heads. Especially crowded of these figures, it's site 6, very likely a watch post located on top of a mountain close to site 5 settlement. Here, indigenous people, likely during the pre-dynastic times, carved petroglyphs of men with roundish head, often drawn with sheep or cattle. When the Egyptian expeditioners arrived, they drew on the same rocks, incorporating these images into their own inscriptions and graffiti. In the middle of the rock panel, we can see a striding man with a mace beating an animal, likely pre-existent to this carving, that seems to bear a plume on his head. The inscription on top mentions Ameniu Chesemu. On the bottom right of the panel, a figure of an archer is visible, which seems to have been drawn before the text was inscribed. Several names and titles of expeditioners are also incised here. Again, on the extreme left, the cursive inscription mentions another Meniu Chesemu. Unfortunately, it is not visible from the picture, but there's another archer bringing a feather on his head in Fakhri's facsimile of this inscription. On the left, instead, we have another man with a bow on the lower part and a feathered head man on the top. This is another rock inscribed from site 6. This is the same location of the previous panel, the same site, and displays men with sticks and bows, animals, besides a larger picture of a man with a plume on his head. Other two examples of carved human figures from site 6, on both cases, there's always a bowman. Wadi al-Hudi 189 is this graffito, which comes again from site 6 and depicts two men, one of whom is clearly an archer with a feather on his head. There is also a line of text inscribed in a barely legible cursive script, at least from the photos, and one could give a tentative reading of the title Imi Ayau. This is a palographical analogies with the inscription 37, which actually from which we don't know the exact find spot, because when it was recorded from Fakhri, there was no mentioning about it. But the description reads of the overseer of the Yau in Tef, and below it is engraved a figure of an archer with a feather on his head. As we already pointed out, this motif is not uncommon in the desert. Pre- and proto-dynastic human figures can be seen all over the eastern desert wearing one or more feathers on their heads. According to Judd's count, the 22% of the human figures found there were feathers. Also, Lancaster's research showed that persons standing and ending settings both use this ornament on their heads. He therefore views the feather as a sign of social standing, social status. Therefore, it seems that the feather was seen more as a characteristic of the warrior or hunter than as an ethnic identifier in the Nile Valley at the time of the formation of the state. The feather has been then the distinctive marking of Nubian archers serving as mercenaries in the Egyptian army since the first intermediate period and the Middle Kingdom, as can be seen from the depiction from tombs, for example, from Beni Hasan. Although it seems tempting to assume specific ethnic identities for these figures represented in an area where the presence of desert nomadic people, as we have seen, is more than confirmed. for this era, we should try to challenge our assumption. The assumption here is that the featherhead and bow means Nubian, or someone ethnically non-Egyptian for the Western Desert, as meant often Libyan, but this identification has been disproven recently by Panaite. From here, scholars tended traditionally to interpret monodimensionally the depiction of bowmen with feather on their head, carved all over the desert, as made by Nubian or local people and or representing Nubian or local people. Besides perpetuating and simplistic approach to ethnicity in ancient Egypt, it doesn't say anything useful for our understanding rocks depictions in their specific context of the desert mining sites. The rock of Wadi el Hudi, on the other hand, without the ethnicity bias and placed in their specific landscape and context, allow us a better understanding. It is important to keep in mind that unlike the archaeological traces that can be occasionally left unintentionally, rock art is made of deliberate representation that were created with specific intent in certain contexts and by specific people. Rock carvings and inscriptions may have been by individuals or groups of people who wanted to socialize with the area and the other people living there. They can only partially reflect a group's ethnic identity. And it's done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cristina. We now have time for some questions before we go on to the next paper. That's right, Mael? We'll do questions now as well.
Yeah.
So if anyone online would like to ask a question, they can do so by putting their hand up. Also, you can put your question in the chat box, and we can also share the microphone in the room as well.
Is there any question, the assistants? No. So I have one question, actually, Cristina. Do you have any anthroponym, or do you know if there is any anthroponym in the graffiti?
So as long as I know from, of course, we have lots of anthroponyms from Wadi el Hudi too, but basically most of them are quite normal Middle Kingdom names, like very well attest and Egyptian, at least, linguistically speaking. We know from other sites in the Eastern Desert that some of these people had also, how can I say, Cushitic origins name. So this is why it's very confusing and sometimes a little bit elusive to put a label on an ethnic label to these people, because we can actually really don't know. It can be both or neither of the two. So.
Okay, yes, it's very interesting because we have the same problem for Bir Samut, a fortified station on the road between Edfu and Berenike in the Ptolemaic period, because I have an ostrakon which mentions an Ondoaris, an anthroponym, I don't know its origin, and he is a guide, and he crosses the desert with a camel carrying mail. So Ondoaris is probably a name of a nomad, maybe a troglodyte or blamy, it's the same thing, but we don't know this anthroponym yet. And we have another name of troglodyte in the Demotic text, and it's an Egyptian name, Arpaesis. So yes, it's really interesting.
It's very interesting, yes.
There's no one else in the room. I'll butt in and ask a question. One of the things that I find fascinating about this kind of talk is the notion of whether these foreigners or not foreigners, these mule hunters and so forth, are part of the expedition, or they're people that lived nearby the mines themselves and then just shortly moved from their nomadic campsite to Wadi El Hudi or Wadi Hammamat or Bir Samut, as we just discussed. And do you think there's any evidence from sites that you've worked at, like specifically Wadi El Hudi, that would say that these nomads are local and they're using the area around Wadi El Hudi and then come there when the Egyptians are on their expedition? Or do you think they're part of the expedition, as in leaving the Nile Valley with the expedition itself? That's a bit of a speculative question, I admit.
Thank you. That's a good point, but I don't know if we will ever discover the answer for it. I think part of them were somehow working together with the expedition, so somehow coming with them, or maybe contemporary, living and working and occupying the same areas. But I mean, is it also possible that they were there before the Egyptian arrived, or came later? It's the interesting thing is that, for example, the pottery from site 21, it's very similar to a Middle Nubian kind of pottery, but it's it will be published soon. And there's also Meredith here in the room that can say us more, like a spoiler. It seems to be made of another kind of fabric. So, I mean, for sure, there's something different, something new, something known, traditionally related to Nile Valley material culture, for sure.
Thank you. That's a good response. I think we can go with Mayo if there's no one else in the room.
Yes, thank you. I have thank you very much, Cristina. I have just two short questions. First, I did not really understand if you have some site where you are sure that it's only pastoral people and nomads for rock art, or if you always have this Egyptian inscription on top of it or aside of it. It is my first question. So do you have some specific part when you have only the remains of nomads or not in the site you studied and the corpus you work on? And the second question is, do you think it would be possible, for example, in Wadi El Hudi vicinity to find some more camp areas and to try to know exactly where the people were living, or at least passing by or not?
Thank you, Well. I'm not sure I totally understood the second question, but I'll start from the first one. From the case study that I've shown, all the rock art, rock engravings and inscriptions are both, I mean, we have both. We don't have like essentially just one of the two. Even in the newest site discovered, they're both again. But who knows? I mean, the Wadi El Hudi, it's big, so maybe at some point new sites will be surveyed and discovered. And for now, that's the evidence. And yeah, about the second question. So I think I didn't really catch it.
Do you think it is possible in the area of Wadi El Hudi, for example, to find by excavation sites which are only nomad camps area, or that we will only find nomadic people inside the sedentary sites, as we found it most of the time in Bir Samut also, for now in Wadi Eloudi, in almost every remains of the nomads we have in the eastern desert of Egypt are from sedentary sites. Do you think that in Wadi Eloudi there is some possibilities, for example, to find truly nomadic camp areas or not?
Well, it's still, I mean, a matter of what we define as a nomadic camp, I think.
Yeah.
So which are the features, actual features that define a nomadic camp and distinguish it from, I don't know, like maybe seasonal mining site, a small scale mining site that it's seasonal. I mean, and there, for sure there should be some huts and some traces of workshop, I mean, of work on the stones and amethyst and stuff. But how can we say, where do we put the label, the distinction? I think the archaeology of nomadism is still a work in progress. And I mean, we still have to discuss a lot about this topic to assign, you know, even an identity to a type of site and remain and material cultural remains.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I think we have a hand up from Kate, and then we have a question in the chat box from Maria. So Kate, if you want to ask a question.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Cristina.
Hi, Kate.
Without stepping too much on Christina's toes, can I add to your answer for Mal? I would just point out that Site 51 is not an Egyptian expedition area. Site 51 very much is where pastoral nomads spent time, probably for 14 to 22 days or longer, who knows? And that's also a place where travelers come through and then come by for a day or two also. And so that is a very unique rock shelter site for travelers and for pastoral nomads that I haven't seen a lot of evidence for the actual Egyptian mining expeditions using it yet. Also, we find pastoral nomadic stuff all over the place. It's just a question of exactly what Cristina had said, you know, parsing out the, you know, how you define it, but also how it's interacting with the space. So it's everywhere, essentially. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
We have a question in the chat box with Maria, which I'll just dictate. Is there any variation in the spatial distribution of these representations and inscriptions? Are they only found in Egyptian contexts?
It's full. We have a lot, and I mean, for now, it seems that they occur most of the time in very high peaks, mountains, hills, where they were basically watch posts. So it seems they were carved by this military, paramilitary personnel while they were watching and guarding and spending their time up there. But there's, I think there's also some kind of disruptive attestation. But it's an hypothesis. I mean, it's just a couple of example, and it's an hypothesis that's still an on-work study by the Wadi al-Hudi expedition team. Sorry, I don't remember the second part of the question, and I don't have it here.
The second part is, are they only found in Egyptian context? So you sort of address that. Or,
yeah.
Whether they're found in Egyptian part of the sites, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Is there any more questions in the room? Because if there isn't, we'll move on to our next speaker, I think. If there's no more questions in the room, we'll move on to our next speaker, which it's my pleasure to introduce Dorian Vanhulle. And Dorian is an archaeologist with a particular interest in the material and iconographic productions of the pre-dynastic and early dynastic periods. His main research interests focus on the birth of navigation in Egypt, boat symbolism, and rock art. Involved in rock art research in the El Kab and Aswan areas since 2019, he is currently investigating the intercultural landscapes of Upper Egypt in the first cataracts during the 5th and 4th millennium BCE, and its impact on the socio-political events that led to the formation of the Egyptian state. I'd also like to state I'd be very lost in my own survey without Dorian's help for the rock art. Dorian's paper is called Giving a Voice to the Voiceless, a rock art perspective on the socio-ecological setting of the Lower Valley during the pre-dynastic and early dynastic period, 5th to 4th millennium BCE. Dorian, when you're ready to share your screen, you may do so, and thank you for joining us. I think you're on mute, Dorian.
I'm so sorry. Indeed. So is it okay now? Can you see the PowerPoint? Yes? Great. If you don't mind, we'll just turn off my camera while I'm sharing my screen, because my Wi-Fi connection here is kind of erratic and unstable. So I think it's a good solution. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, thank you indeed, Marie, Maël, and Julian, for your kind invitation and for these very stimulating conversations. A kind invitation indeed, because I am not at all a specialist of nomadism. And what I would like to present today is a set of observations and reflections rather than discoveries or results as such. And so I invite you to follow me back in time, so before the pharaohs, at a time when Egypt and Nubia did not exist, a time when concepts such as borders, frontiers, national identities, etc. did not exist either. We jump in time back to the 4th millennium BC, the 5th and 4th millennium BC, so during the pre-dynastic and early dynastic period in Egypt and Nubia. This is the last stage of prehistory in that region, and in such a context, archaeology is almost the only source that allows us to, I would say, discuss human occupations and development. But for long, archaeology almost exclusively offered insights on the main material assemblages, or cultures as we call them, relegating other communities less visible in the archaeological records in the dungeons of history, I would say. And these communities, that's these communities that I call these voiceless people. And the fundamental works of the Aswan Kamambo archaeological project, directed by Maria Gatto and Antonio Curci, started to challenge that state of research in the last decade. Not only that project, of course, but mainly, in my opinion. And it shows how complex and multifaceted was this human occupation of the Lower Nile Valley back then. The combination of their observations with the recent reappraisal of prehistoric rock art opens new avenues of investigations and encourages us to adopt new research paradigms. At the end of the day, it appears possible to give a voice to these voiceless people, to make them visible again, and rock art has an important role to play in that perspective. So pre- and proto-historic figurative rock art is attested in Upper Egypt and in Sudan, both in the Nile Valley and in the desert, of course. And this map shows you the main clusters of production in the Nile Valley. Unsurprisingly, they are located near main access routes linking the deserts and the valley, so the Theban region, but also the district of El Kab, Gebel El Silsile, Wadi Shat El Rigal, and in the borderscape formed by the Aswan Kamambo region and the first cataract. The Central Eastern Desert is probably the sector that has been the most investigated in the recent past, but incoming publications focusing on the rock art of the Nile Valley proper and its hinterland will bring some balance to that state of affairs, to that situation. In the Western Desert, of course, prehistoric rock art is mainly attested in and around the main oases, particularly Dakhla and Farafra. But obviously, this image is incomplete, and it only reflects the current state of research, of course. And rock art studies focusing on Egyptian and Lower Nubian material are in constant development and are gaining recognition inside the Egyptological field. It is good to observe this positive trend, especially when remembering the strong hopes some of us were nourishing in 2019 during the Stone Canvas conference held at the Ifao. And back then, as far as Upper Egypt is concerned, the attention was mainly placed on that question: what is depicted and how could it be interpreted? Particularly attracting attention were the official commission productions referring to kingship and political religious processions in the context of the formation of the pharaonic state. The Aswan Komombo region is particularly rich in such productions, and for example, the Nagel Amdulab royal cycle, consisting in several large panels scattered in the landscape, are now famous among prehistorians, but also Egyptologists in general. And I also would like to show you the panel right above, showing a proto-dynastic ruler on a boat, which has been discovered in November 2022 in the Sheikh Mohammed district, so a few kilometers south of the Aswan Bridge on the West Bank. But this, by shifting the attention from what is depicted and how could it be interpreted to the who produced the image and why, one realized that most of past rock art analysis was somehow biased, I would say, by our perception of how the Nile Valley was inhabited and by whom between the 6th and early 3rd millennium BC. This bias is notably induced by the nature of the archaeological finds, which tends to limit the human presence in this region to few main archaeological assemblages. In Upper Egypt, this is the dominant Nakadan culture that focused the attention, and rock art is then often compared to Nakadan archaeological material, and we focused on the engravings that fit with it. But in the process, we neglected the rest of the corpus. And the problem is that the quantity of data which is generally ignored is far greater than that which attracts attention. This explains also why one might have the impression that scientific literature is always dealing with the same rock panels or the same kind of rock panels. The question is then what to do with this silent material. And from that came the questioning. Perhaps the reason why we have difficulties to deal with most of these productions is that there were, in fact, diverse categories of rock arts, in plural, produced by different categories of people. And it is fair to say that archaeological research over the last decades has profoundly transformed our perception of human occupation in the Lower Nile Valley and their surrounding deserts during the Neolithic, Dynastic, and Early Dynastic periods. And when considering Egypt and Lower Nubia during the 4th millennium BC, the dominant cultural assemblages I'm talking about are, you all know them, of course, the Lower Egyptian complex in the north, the Nakadan culture in Upper Egypt, the A group in Lower Nubia. And this is a quick overview compiling the current narratives on these crucial formative periods. In a few words, archaeology shows that this Nakadan culture expands toward the north and the south in the second half of the 4th millennium, where it mingles with local populations, the Lower Egyptians in the north, the A group in the south. Nakadan material progressively became dominant in the whole territory of what is Egypt today. And this is interpreted as the first cultural unification of the land. Political unification reached its peak by the first dynasty, and among other consequences, one can note the abrupt disappearance of the A group and the Lower Egyptian culture from the archaeological record, the development of official iconographic and material productions, showing a high degree of sophistication, but also of writing, of course. And this marks the birth of Egypt as an administrative territory and a political religious state. And this makes, by the same occasion, Upper Egypt and the Nagadan the driving force behind the birth of Egyptian civilization. Well, this is pretty straightforward, right? And probably too straightforward, of course. In fact, these three major archaeological cultures were only dominant manifestations of a much more complex socio-ecological landscape. And to better understand this broad context, I propose that we take a few steps back. From the Paleolithic, depending on climatic variations and their impact on the landscape and on the ecology of this part of the world, the Nile Valley alternatively formed a migration corridor and a welcoming place to live. The famous and so far unique Paleolithic rock art of Kurta is a testimony of one of the phases during which the Egyptian Nile Valley offered a suitable place to stay during the Paleolithic. And so this is the famous Lascaux on the Nile studied by Dirkheug a few years ago, and one of the rare instances of a rock art panel that has been securely dated thanks to OSL dating. And if we progress through time until the early Holocene, we reach what is known as the Neolithic of the Sahara. And we are all familiarized with these maps, which are regularly used to discuss the Saharan Neolithic phases and the subsequent partial abandonment of the Western Desert in favor of the Nile Valley because of the progressive aridification of this part of the world. There is a lot to say about these maps and their validity, and I hope, Maël, that you will forgive me for using them uncritically today. But what I would like to stress here is that this process did not result in a complete abandonment of the Western Desert, especially in Lower Nubia, as you can see on the lower right. And before this migration towards the Nile, we have very few data about human presence in the Nile Valley. Rock art, once again, is of great help. For example, this panel, which has been dated thanks to C14 analysis conducted on the dark rock varnishes. So we know that people were in the Nile Valley producing rock art during the Epi-Paleolithic period, but who were these people? We have no clear answer to that question yet. And alongside rock art, seasonal occupations are attested in Upper Egypt during the Epi-Paleolithic, such as the well-known El Kabian phase near El Kab and contemporaneous human presence on the Red Sea shores that you can see three shelters on Man Cave on the Red Sea shore. So people were in the Nile Valley, people were in the desert. And this is also the time when livestock from the Near East arrived in Egypt via Sinai, the Sinai and the Delta. And we have material typical of that period, so the PPNB, pre-pottery Neolithic in the Levant, in the Wadi Araba, for example, but also rock art and Bedouins marks reminiscent of what Levantine and Arabian rock art offer. And all of that are indication of long-distance circulations in and out of the Nile Valley. Nothing new under the sun, and I totally agree with that. But these facts are rarely taken into consideration when discussing the pre-dynastic and early dynastic periods, which arrived right after that. And in fact, this openness and complex circulation of people of different cultural affiliations remained true during the 5th and the 4th millennium BC, of course. One example is this 5th millennium Tajan culture, Tajan assemblage, characterized by these ornamented tulip beakers. This Tajan culture is the manifestation of human groups connected as much with the desert than with the valley, from the Red Sea shores on the east, as you can see on the map. If I manage to... So the Sun Man Cave towards the Red Sea, but also connected with Gebel Ramla in the west, in orange on the map, so in the Western Desert. And Tajan is a name given from the Bardarian necropolis of Der Taza, near Badari, where the first traces of this group were found. The name is thus misleading, and this is one example of the problems caused by our current terminology. And I will come back to that later. So here is Gebel Ramla, but this so-called Tajan was also connected with Nubia, where late Neolithic sites such as Kadero, for example, in central Sudan, have offered similar ceramic tradition. I'm going a little bit quickly now because I'm stating the obvious, perhaps. But the presence of Palestinian jar in a Badarian tomb in Kowel Kebir testifies to the fact that objects, IDs, people were traveling great distances already at the beginning of the pre-dynastic period, or rather still during the early pre-dynastic period, sorry. And so once again, nothing new. But as soon as we leave the Badarian culture and the 5th millennium to address the Nagadans and the 4th millennium, it is like this openness of the world disappear in our current narratives. All has to be of Nagadan origin, and any exogenous influences, such as those coming from the Near East, for example, during Nagada 2D 3A, I'm thinking the Gebel El Arak knife, for example, are strongly debated. All of the sudden, external contexts are considered to be indirect at best. But Badarian are generally considered to be the precursor of the Nagadan culture, although the real connection between the two is still unclear. And for example, Badarian ceramic production, especially the blacktop, which are also characteristic of the early Nagadan phase, show the same rippled surface than what was produced at the same time in Lower Nubia. In other words, and stating the work of Maria Gatto now, during the 5th millennium BC, both Tarsian and Badarian cultures were strongly related to Nubian tradition. And in this context, it is difficult to determine whether a ripple showed from the southern part of Upper Egypt is Thasian, Badarian, early A group, or something else, if it is not located within a broader context. And this is this broader context that we need to build today in order to progress. And I think, but this could be discussed, of course, that's the goal today, that a socio-ecological approach could help building this broader context in a neutral way. By socio-ecological approach, I mean the study of social structures and organizations identified in a given place at a given time and of their relations with their biotope, environment, climate, fauna and flora, etc. And it involves the analysis of the impact of the evolution of these structures and organizations on the environment, but also the other way around, that is to say, the influence of changing environments on social and political developments. This implies to take into consideration works relevant of social anthropology, geography, ethnography, ethnobiology, etc. And in the recent past, research programs focusing on the deserts and the Nile Valley margins, Nation Kamambo Archaeological Project, mainly highlighted this complex multicultural context of the Lower Nile Valley and its desert during pre- and proto-history. The result gathered by ACAP since 2005 deeply renewed our appraisal of the relation between Upper Egyptians, so the Nagadans, and Lower Nubians, so the A group. It demonstrated the multicultural nature of the region, not only through the mixing of Upper Egyptian and Lower Nubian populations, but also thanks to the discovery of 5th and 4th millennium BC archaeological structures, such as stone rings and tumuli in the valley and the deserts, testifying the presence of enigmatic communities among the valley inhabitants, communities connected with Nubian nomads and pastoralists. In other words, we cannot adopt a Nagada-centrist approach of the material anymore. And moreover, Nubian presence in Upper Egypt, north of Aswan, so in sites such as Hierakonpolis and Armand, shows that the phenomenon was not limited to the first cataract, and that the problematic cannot be addressed through an obsolete who dominated who approach. At the heart of the discussion related to these problematics is the notion of identity, which can be based on various non-exclusive factors, familial, territorial, linguistic, religious, spiritual, political, traditional, etc. And one of the fundamental questions is this one. Before the formation of the state, and therefore before being Egyptian had any meaning whatsoever, on what ground were identities built on? Such observation is not limited to prehistoric context, as shown by the most welcome reprisal of C group and Palmgrave material by Aaron de Souza, for example, and research focusing on the Sheikh Mufta group, these semi-nomadic groups attested in the Western Desert, particularly in and around the oasis of Dakhla during the 4th and 3rd millennium BC, and that were brilliantly discussed during the last webinar. At the end of the day, all of this illustrates the pitfalls of our current terminologies, Badarians, Thasians, Nagadans, A group, C group, etc., which very much shape our vision of these periods and our interpretative approaches. For example, it is very plausible that some, if not most, of our current difficulties are induced by our perception of the Nagadan culture as a monolithic archaeological assemblage, when in fact it was not. Scholars such as Christiana Köhler, René Friedman, and Diane Holmes, among others, identified localisms and regionalisms in both ceramic and lithic productions attributed to these Nacadans. So, I progress. Deserts played a crucial role as highways for goods and people of various cultural affiliations during prehistory, and members of the Nacadan culture were not alone. Okay, great. But to go even further, I would like also to mention this boat engraving documented in Wadi Asafir in the Arabic Peninsula, because it is typologically identical to some pre-dynastic boat engravings known in the Egyptian Eastern Desert and in the Wadi Amamat, notably. And it opens new avenues of investigations. Kanaksoy, who published this boat a few years ago, and I are currently investigating further the possible implications of the discovery and what are the state of knowledge regarding the 5th and 4th millennium BC, the archaeological data on each side of the Red Sea, so to have a large discussions and put everything on the table, because it's a problematic that has been addressed quite regularly in the past decades, but based on very specific elements, and perhaps it's possible to go further in that in this kind of discussions. And so this is all theoretical, but in practice, how could we achieve to make the voiceless speak? How could we approach them? As far as rock art is concerned, how could we distinguish between Naccadan productions and images engraved by other communities? Typological and comparative analysis, considering Upper Egyptian and Lower Nubian material, is one of the ways to do it, but they are not the only one. Unfortunately, recent discoveries, most of them still unpublished, offer unexpected help. The recent discovery by ECAP of Wadi Ras, a corridor of about 50 kilometers long, lying some 45 kilometers to the east of the Nile Valley, to the east of Aswan, is of particular interest in this context. It is in the prolongation of the famous Wadi Abu Subayra zone. A wide chronological spectrum covered by Wadi Ras rock art, which offers petroglyphs ranging from the Epipaleolithic to the late antique and possibly even medieval times, but also its strategic position as a road linking both the Nile Valley to the main eastern desert routes and Egypt to Nubia makes it a well-suited place for intercultural contacts. And the northernmost sector of that wadi, about 15 kilometers long, offered an impressive amount of rock drawings. Several dozen decorated panels have been documented so far, but it's a very small percentage of what is available there. It's the largest concentrations of rock art known currently in Egypt. It's an open-air museum. It's a fantastic place. And there we have productions typical of Upper Egyptian. This is another way to say Nagadans rock art, but also of Lower Nubian rock art. And both of them cohabit in Wadi Ras. For example, this painted panel, typical of the C group, so the Middle Nubian phase, which corresponds to the end of the Old Kingdom and the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, has been painted there in Wadi Ras. So this is the typical Bovid tradition of Nubia, and it has been painted above an Upper Egyptian late pre-dynastic composition, which has been engraved, this one. This rock painting is the northernmost example that we know of this tradition, and the only one in Egypt attested so far as I know, I mean, the painted version of that tradition. Another interesting case study are a few panels showing herd of bovids in what looks like pastoral scenes. Pastoral scenes have never been really identified in the Egyptian Eastern Desert and are considered quite exceptional there, where bovid depictions are generally limited to bulls being lassoed. In Naccadan iconography, such scenes are considered to symbolize the domination of order over chaos through the depiction of symbolic hunts. However, this is not necessarily always the case in desert rock art, and identifying pastoral scenes might help spotting images produced by groups that were in contact with the Naccadan culture, but were not expressing the same messages than the Nagadans on rock. As I used to say, the bow does not necessarily make the hunter. You can have a bow for protection, for example. It can be also part of the paraphernalia of the people there. And so every representation of a human figure with a bow does not necessarily imply implies that the scene is a hunting scene. You have to look at the whole context around that. And on the contrary, pastoral scenes are well attested in Lower Nubia, where sexual differentiation of the animals is often marked through the presence of the other. And surprisingly, there are few similar images in Egypt after all, which might confirm the coexistence of diverse rock art traditions, one related to politically structured societies growing in Nile Valley, and another linked with a more nomadic way of life. And in this context, Wadi Ras Ras offers an exceptional laboratory for rock art research in the future. Discoveries at Bir Nuhayet, so in the deep eastern desert of Sudan, show panels covered with pastoral scene involving cattle, sometimes accompanied by men with bows and arrows and by wild animals. The diverse analysis conducted there showed that some of the engravings were older than 2200 BC, thus suggesting that this cattle tradition is not solely a Middle Nubian or Sea group innovation, but rather a long-lasting Nubian artistic tradition, the premises of which could very well go back to the 4th millennium BC. One of the last examples I would like to show today is the recent discovery of a Neolithic ceremonial center combining an aldered grave with cows and sheep inhumations at Wadi Kashab in the eastern desert of Egypt. These were located within a quite impressive enclosure of upright stone slabs, which were visible from afar. Only the first phase, attributed to the 5th and the 4th millennium BC, is of interest to us today, although the later phases confirm the continuity of some practices related to the cattle-centered behavior for centuries and more in the Egyptian eastern desert. These people were clearly not Nagadans, and the excavators even found elements suggesting that Nagadan people came there and plundered the tomb in search for gold. Facing all this, one can wonder how could we better integrate this intercultural, multicultural, and socio-ecological complexity in our current historical narratives? Or could new geographical approaches, through satellite images, for example, inform about the ecology of a place at a given time? At the end of the day, what do we know about these voiceless communities during the pre-dynastic period and before? Or do we know it? Or could we better approach these groups? Is it even currently possible? What do we know about their relations with the main Nilotic archaeological assemblages? Well, long is the road, indeed. And if rock art appears to be a crucial source of information to deal with these problematics, the only way to progress would be to engage into interdisciplinary research programs, which already exist, of course. Well, today I simply wanted to share some observations and very much hope to benefit from your comments and insights. In conclusion, archaeological investigations and rock art studies, when they are put together, offer good insights on the socio-ecological setting of a given place at a given period. Egyptocentrist, Nubiocentrist, Nagadocentrist views must be abandoned in favor of an holistic appraisal of the data. This implies that we all collaborate, since it is obvious that one person, and even one single project for that matter, cannot embrace this challenge alone. So there's still a lot of work to do, which is great. In fact, long is the road. Well, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I'm trying to stop. Okay. I should be back.
Yeah. So is there any question in the room or in the chat for Dorian?
I don't think so, Maël. You can move on.
Okay. I have one question for Dorian. So you You talked several times about typology and terminology. Do you think we can still working with this typology and terminology, or that we should just get rid of it and try something new? As all of this has been made and built without really thinking about nomadic way of life.
Exactly. That's the big question, isn't it? And that's not an easy one, because I mean, yes, there's an easy answer. Yes, we have to change it, but obviously it's extremely difficult to do it because all of our nomenclature, all of our approach of that period is based on that terminology. I'm speaking for the pre-dynastic and early dynastic period, of course. Mm-hmm. So, but it has been done. I mean, we were talking about Ma'adi Bhutto cultures for a long time, and then now it's the Lower Egyptian complex or Lower Egyptian culture, and it's not a big issue. We could do that with Nakada also. Upper Egyptian complex or Upper Egyptian culture. But in order to do that, we would have to tackle seriously these questions of potential, because it's still debated, regionalism, localism, etc. What does that mean? Is it just isolated particularities, or is it the sign of something more structural, more important? But yes, we have to, at some point, to act and to try to find the best way to adapt this terminology. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that it would be beneficial to change it abruptly because it would create more problems that it would solve problems. But there's for sure ways to adapt it, to make it more adaptable and suitable for the current state of research, and more importantly for what is yet to come, because all of this, once again, is very theoretical. We have things in front of our eyes. Now we have to deal with them and to approach them and to address them. But how could we implement them into our current grid, interpretative grid? This is another problem, and we should approach that together, of course, because one person in isolation cannot change that. It's far too big, of course. Yeah. So it's a long-term perspective, but I think we will have to reach that point one way or another somehow. Yeah.
Okay. I see that Julian has a question.
This is a very basic and silly question, but I thought while I've got you here, I always wanted to ask someone this. When I saw your map on one of the first slides, you showed a lot of the rock art just west of the main mountains of the Red Sea Hills. Mm-hmm. And then you have Wadi Ras Ras and all these sites, and the sites I'm looking at in Sudan. There seems to be hardly any big rock art sites on the east side of the Red Sea Hills and the coast. And do you think that's a reflection of anything diagnostic, or is it a reflection of surveys? In my head, I'm wondering if this is something related to the nomadism itself, where this part of the desert is not suitable for cattle or goat nomadism. But I don't know if it's just something else. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
I think it's a mixture of all of this. Of course, there are lots of areas that are not prospected, so obviously we don't know, and I think perhaps that Axel Prémont could have also some insights in that regard, because she's right when she's saying that it is obviously important to mention places where there is rock art, but it is also important to mention places where there are no rock art at all, because if we don't say it, nobody knows if there is something or not. And so yes, this is a very important point, and I would perhaps I would leave Axel discuss that if he wants to. So yes, this this is puzzling, and for sure there are rock art on the other side. But most of it is not yet known or has disappeared, or I mean, all of the common reasons. So is it as important? Is it similar? Is it different that what we know well since these missions conducted in the Eastern Desert during the 90s and early 20s? I mean, 20 years ago, I cannot answer to that question right now. But perhaps other colleagues that went there could have some insight, more precise elements to give you. But
thanks.
So we have two questions on Zoom, one from Marie, one from Kate. Who want to start? Maybe Kate first and Marie then. Thanks.
Hello, thank you very much for the talk. I agree with you in many ways that looking at local nomadic traditions is very important. So I wanted to ask, besides rock art, do you have any evidence of other elements that might help us really pull in? And I'm specifically interested in grinding stones and grinding slicks. I was at a talk that Laurel Darcy gave at RC last year, where she was talking about how she's been recognizing pastoral nomadic areas as aceramic places, but the way to recognize them was with grinding stones and grinding slicks. And then Site 51 is covered with hundreds of them. And I'm wondering, has there been a big push for looking for this type of element out there, and if that's related to the nomadic traditions?
No, thank you. No, in fact, and that's why this it makes all this difficult, of course, because in the Eastern Desert, as far as I know, there's two elements. The first one is that rock art has been recorded, documented, etc., but there was no archaeological investigation around that, so we don't know. And plus, when we know, there are no such kind of material. In Wadi Ras Ras, it might be different, but perhaps Maria could give some information about that aspect of the archaeological landscape of Wadi Ras Ras. But no, unfortunately, most of the time, the majority of the cases, we don't have that kind of material alongside rock art in the Eastern Desert. And in the valley, it's even worse, of course, because in the valley, well, there's all the Egyptian history that went there, and so there's no such kind of material there. But we should develop a new way of approaching rock art. That's what we are trying to do. That, I mean, combining rock art with archaeological investigation, of course, and do the same all together, so we can then find those kind of elements and not just miss them because we are not looking for them. So this is part of this new dynamic that we try to give to rock art studies in Upper Egypt and in the desert. Then bringing rock art studies into Egyptian archaeology, really, and so then applying methods that are archaeological methods and not just recording methods and documentation.
Thank you. So Marie has a question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Maria.
Yeah,
we can hear you.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I was just trying to support this reply by Dorian. We actually work in Wadi Ras Ras only for 4 days, so we didn't have the time to look for specific stones or work stones. The only thing that we found on top of the plateau apart from stone features with nothing inside, is shared of marl, a fabric, so pre-dynastic, that was reworked as an axe. So, and we have the same kind of tool found also along the Nile in pre-dynastic context. So that was the only thing that we could find as far as the archaeological record is concerned. However, Marie and Maëlle are working with us, trying to read the landscape, so trying to do that from satellite imaging perspective. And Marie can tell you more of what she found around Wadi Ras Ras, as far as this kind of, let's say, anthropic evidence of pastoral nomadism in the area. Or Maëlle too, I mean, he can contribute to, also for the water, for instance. So I leave the floor to them.
So, Marie, maybe you can tell us a few words about that and ask your question then, if it's okay for you.
Yeah, and it was part of my question too. First, thank you, Dorian, for your presentation. And yes, with satellite images, we found around Wadi Ras Ras some maybe pastoral evidence that may be linked to evidences that may be linked to Wadi Ras Ras. We found a lot of pastoral passes that can be seen from satellite images. We didn't find any wells, unfortunately, and that was part of my question. Dorian, you talk about the necessity to link different archaeological elements with environmental and landscapes information. And my question was, do you have other evidences, other idea of evidences that we may have to look for, or did you already find some on other side, for example, that may be linked with desertic and pastoral rock art panel?
Not exactly, no. I must say that no, not yet. And this is also part of all this reflective work and trying to find solutions. So to, just as you say, know where to look and know what to look at, etc. And so this is also why at the end of the day, we gathered together a few weeks ago in Brussels to discuss that. It's because I had this approach of rock art, and then all the rest was just mere, feeling. And but I didn't know how exactly to put my fingers on it. And when we are on the field, as you know, we are all focusing on what we have to do, and so some on archaeology and others on rock art, etc. And then I very much hope that in the future, so in the next missions, etc., I will be able to find a way to identify new things and just going beyond reflection and trying to build something more substantial. But once again, the best way to identify such element is to put all of our data together at some point. So because otherwise we are not expert in everything. Even in ceramology, for example, or things like that, or lithics, there could be tons of silex flints in front of a rock panel. I mean, if there, I would need help to sort them out, etc. So right now I don't have anything specific yet. No. But I was very much impressed by your work with Maëlle, because I think that opens new way of looking at the desert, new way of looking at those paths and routes, etc. And who was there and why and when and how was the landscape at that moment. So geographical elements, things that I am not expert at all. And so this is the combination of elements that will ultimately, I think, allow us to progress. The question is, to what element should we focus our attention, and how should we look at it? Because the way we look at things with our preconceived ideas, etc., even though we try to be as objective and neutral as possible, of course, it has an impact on how we interpret things. And so the best way to change the way we interpret things and the way we look at things is to change the paradigm. And so stop focusing perhaps on the material elements, which is attached to specific cultures, but looking more on the environment and who was there and what is there, and all of these things go together, etc. So yeah, it's pretty much complex. It's not yet really clear in my head, but I mean, all of that material is there in front of us. We don't have to look for things that are not there, and so it's just the way we look at it and how we combine things. I think that would be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. You're totally right. I didn't give more details, but yeah, to make things a little more clear, with Maël, we work on the pastoral path around Wadi Ras, and that allows us, in collaboration with Dorian, Maria, Cape, etc., to see that, yeah, indeed, Wadi Ras was used by pastoral groups, and that Wadi Ras may be considered as a kind of corridor that link Nile Valley and desert. Maybe I wasn't very clear at the beginning. So yeah, you're totally right. It's only with that kind of collaboration that we can know more about everything. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any more question before there is a question in the chat room. Is there any question at the Ifao or not?
No, no, man.
Okay, so the question in the chat room is from Cynthia. What do you know about how people and animals survive in these desert areas, especially when you cannot find wells? What do people and animals eat and drink to survive? So maybe I can give a short answer to that, if it's okay for Cristina and Dorian.
Yes.
Most of the time, in fact, there is a lot of water in the desert if you know where to look at. In fact, for nomad people living in the desert, we are always thinking that what is important for water is wells. But wells, deep, strong wells, where you are sure to find water. In fact, when you have herds, what is important is to have sufficient water, because you don't have to take the water from the underground to the surface. And if you are enough people in wide enough areas, you can have water almost at every time of the year. And if you have a problem with water, you just go to some refuge area, which are this deeper and with a longer lifetime wells, or in the Nile Valley, or in some areas where you know that you can dig some wells that are sometimes 1 or 2 meters deep. And there you find water, and you dig a lot of well in this area, 5, 6, 10, just to have enough water. So it's not something too difficult if you really know the place. The problem is to really know the place and to know how, when, and where to move. It's a question of knowledge and skills, in fact. And there is another question from Cynthia. Is there any experimental work on how long it takes to create a particular rock art image? So how long someone had to be there to create it?
That's a wonderful question. And in fact, no, there's no really, I mean, things has been done, but there's no real experimental archaeology that has been conducted regarding rock art. I mean, real one that takes years, etc., to build good protocols, etc. So it's a very difficult and complex process. But I mean, it's part of the current project that are being developed regarding rock art in Egypt. So hopefully it's going to be initiated next year, and we will see where that leads us. Because that's a very important and good question, of course. We are discussing rock art, but we don't know exactly what it means to produce such image. And so, yes, this is something that remains to be done. Yeah.
There is one last question from Cynthia. Is there enough nomadism in the present day for any ethnoarchaeology to be feasible? I think this question is more for Julian, maybe. Because in Egypt, there is less and less nomads, and their way of life really changed a lot.
I'm going to answer this a bit with a silly answer. Our next webinar should hopefully deal with this exact question. There is lots of ethnoarchaeology done in Sudan and other parts of Northeast Africa on nomadic societies. And there are still lots of nomads in all of Northeast Africa. As Maël said, there's a different rate of urbanization in nomadic communities in the modern day. So in different places, you have more or less nomads than you did 100 years ago or 200 years ago or in the past. But that changes everywhere from the Sinai to the Eastern Desert to the Western Desert. Where I work in Eastern Sudan, there are still lots of people that practice transhuman nomadism, so people that move with their livestock. I hope that helps.
Is there any more question? No, so I have one remark we are already in a more general discussion, finally. That's great. It's quite natural. But I have just one general remark from what we heard today and what we discussed today. It's that finally, it's not that there is no voice for the nomads. This is just that it's a really low voice and we can't hear it alone. I think it's really the important thing. Dorian emphasized it, and it's great to see today we saw rock art and inscription evidence combined with archaeology, but we need to put all the thing together, of course. If I heard correctly, Kate mentioned the work of Laurel Darcy-Ackley. She prepared in the framework of the MAVDO mission and the Desert Network project, GIS modeling about places where it's good to camp or places where it's difficult to camp. Maybe it could be applied to other places, for example, near Wadi Ras Ras, to help to find where the people were camping. It can be a huge save of time, in fact, to have this kind of tool, especially for remote sites, which are quite difficult to reach. In the same kind of idea, I think that working on satellite imagery is something that is not new, but I really think that the way that Marie and I looked at it, crossing the archaeological perspective and my environmental perspective, made us going much further than everything that I was able to do before. And I think that it's really something that we should do more. We really should look at each other's data from different disciplines. It seems natural to say that today, but most of the time we are still working together only when we are publishing, writing, and we are almost never working on the raw data together. And I think it would be something that we need to do much more. And the last thing I think that we should do probably much more is to try to check everything on a regional scale, because Cristina shows us some evidence from Wadi El Oudi, but in connection with some evidence from elsewhere. Dorian showed us very nice maps with a boat in Saudi Arabia, in the Arabic Peninsula. So we really have, I think, to be more careful about nomadism at a more regional scale. And as several members or directors of very important projects about the Eastern Desert of Egypt are there today, I must say I would be really happy if we can collaborate more about this question all together, because we all have small parts of data there and here. But if we put all our scarce data together, I think we can do something really great about nomadism in the Eastern Desert of Egypt, because it is still possible to do some research there. It's much easier there than, of course, in Sudan right now, and even in comparison with the Western Desert, which has been closed for a long time. So maybe I was a bit too long, but just to sum up, work more together in a more regional way, because we need to have these points of the maps, but we need to know how far people from the points were going, and we need to know how to connect the different points, really. Is there any other question or remark?
Cynthia has some question in the chat. Maybe for Dorian, are there any archaeobotanical and archaeozoological studies in the areas where rock art is found first?
Well, once again, those kind of inquiries, investigations are conducted in archaeological sites, but not specifically in rock art context. I mean, if you are studying just a rock art panel, you don't have generally you don't have experts of that kind of field with you, and so this is indeed something that should be developed. But once again, a rock art site is you are in the open air, in between rocks, and it's not an archaeological site, and so it's a different organization. And this probably has also to be adapted in the future. Yes. So until now, no, unfortunately. Is there a chance that the boat in Arabia may be a fake? Well, no, for what I have seen of it, but I didn't go there, so I'm gonna remain careful just because that's the best thing to do since I didn't go there. But I trust my colleague and his publication, so normally no. Plus, it is located in a place that I mean, it would be. I fail to see the point of making a fake boat identical to what pre-dynastic rock art in Upper Egypt offers in that area of the Arabic Peninsula. But I mean, of course, so until further notice, no, it's a real engraving. Yeah.
And I must say, regarding this boat, it can be surprising to have this boat so far from the other ones in the Eastern Desert of Egypt. But if you check at the nomad movement in the 18th and 19th century in this area, you had the Atoni and the Maza who were going exactly from the places where you have the boat in the Arabian Peninsula and the places when you are the northernmost boats in the Eastern Desert. So if it is something that can be reached, and in 1 year you can be on one side or the other side by foot, going through the Sinai. So it's something that is not a big problem if you have the good guide and if you are someone from the desert. There is one question. What do we know about them as people? What can say us physical and cultural anthropology? Oof. That's a difficult question. We need to find them first.
We are not there yet, but that's the goal.
Yeah, that's probably one of the main problem right now. We have material, we have rock art, but we have so few excavations on funerary structures from these people that we have almost none of these people, and it's really difficult, unfortunately. We don't have the huge data sets that you have in the Nile Valley for this kind of thing.
And when we have structures, they are plundered to an extent that, unfortunately, there's no much left. And so, yeah, we don't have much to discuss here. Yeah.
Is there any more question or remark?
I have one.
Yeah.
If we have time. I think both Dorian and Christina's papers brought up the point of rock art and inscriptions show interaction between possibly two different peoples, although I admit that we're not quite clear where one people ends and another begins. And I think what interests me is the reasons for those interactions. So the obvious one in Christina's paper was mineral exploitation. There are nomads at the Wadi El Hudi and Wadi Hammamat, the mineral exploitation. In Dorian's paper, if you have interaction, I'm guessing, Dorian, it's probably more for transhumance, so grazing and watering. There's the movement of herds and peoples, but it could be also mineral exploitation.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
And then my question, I guess, for Cristina, if she can comment as well as Dorian, is do you think these rock art inscriptions are basically part of the same multi-millennial cycle? I always like thinking of things over thousands of years rather than hundreds of years, of cooperation between nomads and Nile Valley dwellers. And that cooperation might also manifest in the adoption of the physical rock art as a medium. Yeah, one people giving their iconography to another people, giving their techniques of carving to another people, both sharing the same shelters at the same time. If any of you care to comment.
Okay. Well, it can be that way, or it can be more simple, like people later in the Middle Kingdom arrive in a site that was already visited by prehistoric people and just found figures and, try to imitate, maintain their own style, of course, because we can definitely see there's a different style and probably techniques, but somehow borrowing motives and re-signify them, giving new meanings. That's probably how the iconography of the feathered man in the prehistory, pre and proto-dynastic rock art somehow arrived to the hieroglyphic script too. It has been assumed that somehow it is a kind of a precursor of the hieroglyphic sign for the archer, for the bowman, and but it's yeah.
Yes, and well, I agree entirely with Cristina, and well, as far as prehistory and pre-dynastic, etc., period is concerned, in that context, what you said, Julian, is totally valid. Of course, it's part of this. That's what also I wanted to go back beyond the pre-dynastic and up to the Paleolithic, because there's rock art is a social action. and it's kind of ubiquitous. And so following rock art production through time is also very informative and very interesting. And so yes, there's it was used as a way of expression. So what was the main idea behind these images? It changed a lot through time, of course, so we will never really know. But it was a way of expression, and in the context of Egypt, of course, pre-dynastic iconography, pre-dynastic rock art, all of that, and their evolution, I think, yes, it leads somehow to the hieroglyphic system. I mean, the way of using image to express ideas, and then words, and then sounds, etc. I mean, the boat, for example, which is ubiquitous in pre-dynastic iconography and in rock art specifically, it remained in the hieroglyphic system as an ideogram, for example. There's a lot of different boats, but they are ideogram because, I mean, because, no, perhaps it's too strong to say that, but it's interesting, I would say, because during the pre-dynastic, it was used as a major symbol of a lot of different things. So, but what is important to note, and that's perhaps the difference between the way rock art was used and observed and consumed somehow, during prehistory and then during history, is that we have this shift by the early dynastic period. So the so-called Nagada Dynasty 0 and Dynasty 1. I don't know where there's balloons. Perhaps because I did that, I don't know. There's a shift that we all observe in the material productions, artistic productions, craftsmanship, iconography, etc. So when the state started to be created and to be structured, etc., it had an impact, a huge impact on the populations that were living in the lower Nile Valley, in Egypt, but also in Nubia, and the way image was used. And there's this shift we also witnesses in rock art production. There's a how could I say that? The diminution in apparently in rock art production, which the typical pre-dynastic rock art productions in the deserts and in the Nile Valley, they seem to drop by Nagada 3A, B, and they are replaced by very, I mean, complex productions linked with royalty, so the Nagel Amdulab cycle, for example. So productions that are, even from a technical point of view, far more qualitative. I mean, so these productions have been commissioned, and most probably the people that did them, the authors, were I mean, they learned to do it, and they know exactly the official iconography of the time. So there was some kind of school of knowledge that somehow didn't exist before. And so we have this shift when rock art started to be used to mark the landscape. That's what we have, for example, in the Sinai, and what Pierre Tallet published a few years ago. So to mark very important places, so the mines in the Sinai, or very strategic places in the Nile Valley. And so rock art has been used by the authorities then to, I mean, convey some kind of propaganda, I would say. But population didn't use it to the same extent that before. And it progressively disappeared. This pre-dynastic and prehistoric tradition disappeared. And what we have instead after that is inscription in expeditions context, etc. And so then exchanges of services between Egyptian expeditions and then more local or help, I would say. And so, but it's a very different context, and the way rock art was used changed. I think that's the impression that I have. And so what you were suggesting, this long-lasting tradition of rock art and contact between people in the desert and the valley for millennia, it is true to a large extent during prehistory, so during for millennia for sure. I'm not sure then if once we passed in the historical period, then I would indeed agree with Cristina. Yeah, I mean, it was a long explanation, perhaps too. But,
I mean, it could be both. I think.
Exactly.
No? I mean,
yes, exactly.
Sometimes we just, I don't know, forget that besides, the official and so ideological reasons behind the production of something, it could be an art or in this case, rock art and graffiti. There could be just, human action and decision that could be individual and not motivated by some kind of ideology behind. So, and actually, I think in the scale, if we reduce the scale, as Mael suggested, and we just check to regional and I mean even micro-regional situations, we can even notice this phenomenon more than observing the phenomenon of rock art and rock inscriptions from far and from just as a product. I mean, for at least for pharaonic period of this expedition going back and forth to the desert. So yeah, we should not rule out the hypothesis, of course. But yeah, I agree with you too.
Yes, it's a matter of context also. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. Is there any other question or remark? I think we are reaching probably the end of the webinar session. So thank you very much to everyone at the Ifao and on Zoom. It was very nice to share this time with all of you. Just a quick word to say that, so as Julian already told you at the beginning, we will have another session of the seminar in December, then another one in March. And we are trying to organize a workshop at the Ifao at the end of April in presence, all at the Ifao. So just to make you know that you will have some more news from the program Nomad, and we are more than happy to see that you are there for the first session, for the second session, and we hope to have you there for the third, the fourth, and for the workshop, of course. Thank you very much to Dorian. Thank you very much to Cristina, and to all of you for your attendance and your remarks and question. And thank you very much, Julian and Marie, of course, for the co-organization. It was a nice time together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.